Portfolio assessment is a collection of work that demonstrates learning over time, and there's several benefits to using portfolios as an assessment tool. The first is that it's individualized, meaning that it's specific to each student. It's not necessarily standardized. It's showing what that student is doing or has done in a course or in a program. It's showing tangible evidence of the outcomes for the course or for your program. So there's things on the in the portfolio, if it was a hard copy, or on the digital portfolio that you can see. So there's tangible evidence or products or artifacts. We use the word artifacts in our portfolio. The portfolio makes space for student reflection of learning. So students are responsible for justifying why they've included artifacts. There's usually some sort of attached narrative that goes along with what they include, why it was worthy of inclusion, and how it demonstrates their meeting of those objectives. It also demonstrates growth over a course of study. So you see work from the beginning of a class or a program, and as well as work from the end. And so you're able to see how thinking is changing throughout. And then it shows also course learning within the context of program learning. So if you choose to do a portfolio that lives with the student beyond the class, you'll be able to see how that class, those course objectives, that student learning fits into a greater program, as opposed to just isolating it. So there's 4 different types. This is what I find. I'll admit, I Googled this. So the 4 types of portfolios that I found were these showcase, process, assessment, and the hybrid. A showcase portfolio, I think we're very familiar with. This is super common in the art world. This is where you collect your best work and you just show what your best work is. So it could be a collection of photography, a collection of musical compositions, a collection of products or designs that you've created, and that's that. A process portfolio, also called a learning portfolio, is a work in progress, and it captures the learning process. So it's not necessarily to show your best work, but it shows how you're developing, how you're reflecting on that learning, and how that continues. The third type is an assessment portfolio. This is a portfolio that is commonly used to show how a student has mastered different elements of a curriculum. And the last type is a hybrid. It's a combination of any of those. In our music ed portfolios, the portfolio acts as a different type of portfolio at different points in our process. So we could call it a hybrid portfolio, but it does different things at different times within our program. So if a professor chooses, and we encourage all of our professors in the music ed program to take advantage of the portfolio, uses it, it's professors ask students to submit their best work and showcase their best work from the semester. So that's a showcase portfolio for each course. Then as a result, over the course of the program, we're able to see the demonstration of growth among many classes, and we actually use that portfolio to help guide our students into student teaching placements, as well as future teaching degree careers. And now at the end of the program during student teaching, we're using it as an assessment tool, an assessment portfolio to demonstrate that they've met the New York State teaching standards and frameworks that are appropriate for licensure. So our portfolio functions in all those different types at different points in our program. Often portfolios are used to showcase achievements and projects for potential jobs. So I know when I was creating a portfolio, when I was an undergrad for my teaching licensure, it was an assessment portfolio, but the understanding was it was also highlighted to it was an opportunity for me to attach it in my cover letters and my resume. So it was a showcase of my best work for jobs. That is something that is a possibility of our portfolios, but that's not actually the primary objective of our portfolios. And this was something that I didn't understand when I first came here, because I thought it was a showcase portfolio of students' best work. And that's not necessarily what we're trying to use it for. We're trying to help our students grow and reflect on the knowledge and skills and dispositions that we want, that we're teaching in our program, and then showing the achievements and competencies and standards. So it's more about us, our students, and the professors in the program, as opposed to getting jobs. Now, that being said, a byproduct of a well-done portfolio is that it can be used potentially for the job search. But there's certain things that that people, hiring committees might see on the portfolio and go, I don't understand why that's there, but that's because it has a different purpose. So just so you're aware, because I'm going to show you 2 examples of portfolios in our program, but we use a specific framework for our portfolio and to help students organize and place artifacts. And this has to do with our department's framework and our departmental goals. And we use a framework called that we have called the 4 pillars that mark the contemporary music educator. And these are dispositions, habits of mind, ways of thinking, and ways of approaching teaching and music teaching and learning that we see as important. And these are this flexible musicianship, critical thinking, being a principled practitioner, and an innovative leader. So on all our portfolios, we have different tabs where or folders where students put the different artifacts to demonstrate their development in these dispositions. We also have a 5th tab called competencies, and these are typically where they throw products, things that don't necessarily fit within those 4 dispositions. This is something that these are other things that they do that also demonstrate that they're a competent teacher, that they know how to do the things that teachers do. So the way we design our portfolio is that students are choosing the artifacts. They choose where to put the artifact. We help guide them as teachers, their professors, into where that might be appropriate, but ultimately it's up to them to place them in a specific spot. And then they construct a narrative, which is some sort of reflective paragraph or 2, which describes what that artifact is. And then they give context of why it came to be, so how they created it in their classes. And then also they talk about why it demonstrates their knowledge in that particular part of the framework. The first portfolio that I'm going to show you is Sarah McIntyre's. Sarah McIntyre is closer to the end of her music education program, but she hasn't started student teaching yet. Over to the side, we can see Sarah has listed the different folders or tabs for our framework that I talked about. And on the home screen, there is a narrative as well as a picture of Sarah. This talks about her teaching philosophy, why she wanted to be a teacher, what her core beliefs are. And this is something that is edited and changed throughout her student pre-service teaching career here at Crane, and will continue to be edited throughout. So I'm going to, if you click through these things, I'm going to go to principled practitioner. She talks about what this means, what a principled practitioner is up above, and then below she starts showing some artifacts, and she includes teaching videos, so reflections where she's talking through different readings she's had, as well as the readings with some certain reflections. So as well as some lesson plans. These were some lesson plans that she did for my class about showing how she's able to plan and come up with a lesson that is student-centered. So if you go to innovative leader, you'll start to see some weirdness going on where some things aren't accessible. And that's one drawback with a digital portfolio, is that sometimes students and professors don't necessarily know how to make things accessible for everyone. So there's a little bit of foolproofing that has to happen. And this is Frankie Altamarino. He is a senior in our music education program. He is currently student teaching, and he is actually piloting our new TPA. So his portfolio is what we're hoping things will look like with our students here and how it's reformatted. With Frankie's, if you look to the side with the tabs, there is the About Me section, which is similar to Sarah's. It's a landing page with a philosophy and things. He actually added a resume at this point, since it's more fully formed. And he's at the job search part of his pre-service career. But he took the tabs. If you open up the Power Preparation, the framework is now put into this other tab called the Power Preparation. And there is a new tab down at below called Emerging as Professional. And this is specifically for his student teaching. So he is talking through some of the things that he is pulling together in his portfolio for a final presentation. Right now, since he's piloting this, it's a little messy because this isn't supposed to be public for you all, but this is the criteria for what he needs for his presentation and in here, so it's just a placeholder. But you can start to see how he's thinking through things and how he is going to reframe his portfolio for presentation to show he's reaching the New York State teaching standards. And he has decided he's going to work towards the idea of scaffolding as in his teaching, and how that was powerful with presenting new ideas. And his artifact that he is really leaning into is this Padlet that he's created with his student teaching that just shows all of his teaching journals, his reflections, and lesson plans through his student teaching as he's going through there. He also is, if you go to the competencies page, we have a place for student teachers called the Artifact Repository. And this is where he is collecting specific artifacts in his student teaching that align with the teaching standards. So he will have to come up with 14 of these artifacts. For instance, here's insert. He had picked what he was going to put here, but he hasn't put it in yet. And then when he presents his portfolio, for the sake of time, he'll be only presenting a few of these. So the portfolio is just slightly different as it's turning into an assessment portfolio. The last thing, and this is probably where a lot of you are wondering, this is all nice, but there's some obvious challenges that might appear. And these are the challenges that I can think of right off the top of my head. The biggest is learning and teaching the technology. We've had to embed how to set up a Google site into our introductory class. So our professors in that class have had to teach students how to navigate Google Sites. It's not as intuitive as you would hope. So they have to teach what makes a good website and how to create hyperlinks and how to embed files. It's not foolproof in that where our students, while they are comfortable with using tools in the cloud and using the internet, they still miss certain things. Sarah is detailed oriented, but you notice there were several artifacts that just weren't visible because she hadn't done the proper permissions for a public website. So catching those and guiding through those is time consuming and challenging. I think that's actually the biggest challenge. The nice thing about this, if we're doing this over the course of the program, we can continually catch this over the lifespan of in the program, and we can fine tune that as opposed to making everything perfect within the first one. The second challenge is an onboarding challenge. For the most part, our portfolio is optional. There's no one saying we have to do these portfolios or we have to include them. This has been a mishmash of participation within our program with professors, not either knowing how they can participate or how they can integrate the portfolio into the course, or just not choosing to do it. I jumped on it full with excitement because I saw it as an opportunity for me to align my course with the rest of the program. But you do need to convince your colleagues and help them understand how to use the portfolio. I actually use the portfolio as my final. They take projects that they did in my class and they put it on my portfolio. And so my final is them presenting their best work to me. And then the final challenge is committing to the process, because there is many different aspects of the portfolio there with these the other two challenges. It's very easy for you to just let it fall by the wayside and not maintain it or sustain it or put the effort into it. So a portfolio only is successful if you continually add things to it and you continually revisit it. And until we had this new TPA formation, the portfolio was maintained and really concentrated at the start of our program, and then sort of fizzled out until they were looking for jobs and it turned into a job portfolio. Now that we're using it as our final assessment, there's more of a buy-in with the students as well as professors to really maintain that, so they can help show that growth trajectory that they really are learning things and developing in a program.
John, how would you categorize Sarah's and Frankie's portfolios in terms of those categories that you set up initially, in terms like showcase and process and so forth? Is there a kind of a weighting of material in there, or a weighting of categories?
I mean, Sarah's is definitely growth oriented, so that learning portfolio. I think it also depends on the professor and the classes she's had. So since she's including in prior classes, she's having a lot of readings that she's done because she was in classes that were more theoretical and not necessarily doing teaching. So she wasn't necessarily always creating lesson plans or teaching children, so she didn't have teaching videos. There's a lot of that reflective thinking going on. So that's sort of why I considered it a learning portfolio. It was just showing that development. Whereas Frankie's, he has to show that he has met the New York State competencies and New York State teaching standards, and he has to show tangible evidence. So those are lesson plans, those are teaching videos, those are objects, and he has to connect them directly. Whereas Sarah is really working more towards how she's developing her ways of thinking in those dispositions.
Hi, I'm wondering about, thinking about growth. When a student starts developing their portfolio at the beginning of the process, does everything that you put in stay through the duration? And then when you get towards the end, are there places built in for reflection on like how you've changed over the past couple years? And
yeah, so kind of no. And this is where maybe it's a criticism and where we can really think about it as a department. Can we have those check-ins to help ask those questions to show me how you're developing? So I will say, originally when I was first doing this, I saw this as a showcase portfolio. So as they were leaving my classes, I was one of the last classes they had, and they were going into student teaching. I was recommending they got rid of a lot of their earlier stuff, a lot of the reading reflections, so that it was more that tangible objects, the lesson plans and the teaching videos that a school administrator or someone who was going to hire them was interested in. as we've integrated and we're moving towards this TPA, we are asking our students to reflect in that final presentation how their undergrad, how their coursework has influenced their student teaching. So that check-in that isn't happening is not happening until the very end. So they have to show their growth and development. But I think there's a way that and I'm going to start with me, that people who are adding to the portfolio could smartly ask questions to ask when they're adding artifacts in their portfolio for a specific course, to ask, how is this relating to past things that you already have in your portfolio? Can you tell about how you are developing and how your thinking is changing from the other artifacts, how this fits in with the other artifacts in there? And I think that might be something that we as a department definitely should think about, to make sure that they're constantly thinking about how it fits in.
That was going to be my question, is like they're writing narratives, and I was just wondering, like do you guide them in the narrative at all, or is there any training in the narrative and like questioning and like helping them to put their best foot forward and stuff like that?
So this is all part of that teaching and learning the tech and helping our students understand this. So in our first 2 classes in our sequence, our program sequence, they really are taking an effort, and every semester they're reconstructing. My colleagues are being very patient with us. They're reconstructing assignments to help them write narrative. So even if it's not an artifact that might ultimately end up in the portfolio, they're trying to get the students to write some sort of summative paragraph about what they're doing so that they can start writing in that manner. So we do have like a worksheet with that helps them think about how to write a narrative, but we also are helping them try to practice writing those narratives. I will say by the time they get to me, they have a firmer understanding, and I go through their narratives and I say, you need to act more about this context, you need to do more about this, and then it's just more of a revision. But earlier on in that freshman and sophomore year, they're getting a lot more guidance with it. Peter.
I was gonna say, it's very impressive how much like she's laid out, that's great. I mean, really good.
Yeah, I mean, we have I will say we do have some students who are like, they write like 100-word block text, and then I say, okay, you need to describe what class this was in. You need to, this was my class. So in this class, which I was required to do this, I did an assignment called this. Like they are thinking that we are reading, or that I'm the only one who's looking at it and not the other professor. So they are struggling with stating the obvious, what they think is the obvious, which is just a form of academic writing. They don't really realize the tedium of spelling everything out so there's no misunderstanding.
Yeah, and I have 2 interns in the library this semester, and I think having artifacts to demonstrate like what you do in your thinking process is really good for any student. So I could see where this could be applicable to other students and programs, because I don't think the career world is just, oh, they got that degree, I'm going to hire them, because there's a bunch of people with that degree, and if you can demonstrate like, this is what I did, this is my process and kind of my philosophy and who I am, I think they're going to have an edge over other people.
Absolutely.
Getting jobs.
And one thing I like about our portfolio, and I didn't really quite understand it when I first saw it, because again, I was used to showcase portfolios that were for jobs. One thing I like about this portfolio is that while they are supposed to edit their teaching philosophy, and so you see whatever it is at that time, if you go into their artifacts, they're including reading reflections where they really are talking and applying it to their teaching philosophy. So instead of just a lesson plan or a snapshot in time, they're showing snapshots of their teaching philosophy and of their philosophical thinking. And so as a result, you can see these patterns and these through lines and how they're maturing in their thoughts. Whereas if it was just a showcase portfolio, I'd be like, oh, you probably don't need this reflective thing because it's your teaching philosophy here. So that's one benefit of this, that learning portfolio type. Peter.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that reflection question, and we actually have something already established that could be a vehicle for that. The students when they're ready to enter student teaching, they, as you said, and showed us, they kind of reformat their portfolio, and we ask them to identify specific pillars and specific state teaching standards on which to focus. And at the end of the student teaching process, we ask them to write a little reflection paper about their experiences and how successful they were, how they address those things. It might be a time to ask them even to look further back and look at how the portfolio supports evidence of their growth in those things from the very beginning as they go along. And I was also thinking about, and some people may not be aware of this, but when our student teachers go into student teaching placements, they're working with faculty who are not typically in Potsdam or anywhere nearby because they're spread all over the state. So the people who are working with them in the past have had no way to really get to know these students before they come in. And in fact, that was something that they really asked for, was how can we get to know these students better before we start looking for placements for them? And I think the portfolio offers a wonderful opportunity for them to get to know these folks and see, who they are, where they're coming from, what their experiences have been. The downside is there's a lot of stuff in there, and who's got time, to look at all of it. So I think we are curating through the attachment to the specific classes. There is a process of curation and saying what should be in here, or what is the best example you have from this experience in this particular thing. So we know that eyes have been on these artifacts throughout the process. When they get to the end, as you said, they're going to be giving us a presentation that's very focused on some specific things. So the question of how to just confirm that all of these things are documented, and then actually dig in and come up with some kind of an assessment instrument or process whereby we can sign off on them at the end. And that's kind of the step, I think, where we are with the whole project right now is what do the assessors actually do at the end? Do they just say, yep, the artifacts are there?
Mm-hmm.
Or, do they say, well, this shows this, but not really to the standard that we would like, in which case we have to have really looked at it carefully and have some kind of a way of reporting that. So that's the challenge I think that we're facing right now, is just what does the very end of this process look like? And those students who you mentioned before, and particularly Frankie and his counterpart who are going through the pilot, they will be presenting these things in the next week and a half. So we'll have a chance to see how that actually plays out. I think that will be a very interesting piece of the puzzle.
I'll speak a little bit more about getting to know, because Sarah recounted an anecdote she had as she was working with her student teaching supervisor facilitator, who will be, as she goes into student teaching next fall. He was looking through her portfolio and pulled up a teaching video of her working with kids, and apparently saw it, was so impressed that he pulled his wife over, who was a teacher, and said, this is a teacher, and so immediately started to see things in that teaching video of the strengths of Sarah, and probably was already immediately thinking of how he could push her further to develop her skills. So the portfolio has already shown that it's helping those who aren't even with these people in person, of getting to know these students and their thinking and what they're able to do. And I will say Sarah is a little exceptional, but I'm not going to show you bad ones.
But it's a thought process too that you're making them go through, which is really valuable to their whole career. Like if they want to do a project, if they want to innovate something, having them go through these thought processes and reflecting and, doing research and then reflecting on it and putting it into action and then presenting it is like, it's great.
I mean, that's what we want our teachers to do. That's what Potsdam, what SUNY wants us to do. I mean, when we go through our reappointment, we have to think through our courses, reflect on criticisms, reflect on our own thing, how we change things. So we're helping build that skill or that mindset with these teachers now at the start of their career, in a more guided process.
I'll just say too that while this is all focused on a particular major and discipline, I think I see potential in these processes for a lot of other fields and a lot of other degree programs, in part because we read a lot about how the people in industry are always asking higher ed to produce thinkers and problem solvers rather than just people with skills. And I think asking these questions, asking them to make these kinds of decisions and these kind of reflections can be really helpful in developing students who are thinking in that way. So as you said, Jennifer, very correctly, these folks are developing a mindset for their whole future career. And I can see that playing out very positively for people, not just in education or music education, but in a lot of other fields as well.
I have tons of things that pop into my head, but I want to go off of what Peter was just talking about a little bit. And so I had a question for Jonathan. How do you provide feedback on the portfolio? And then, given what just Peter said, what popped into my head is there an opportunity for peer feedback in addition to instructor feedback on this? So specifically because we're also talking about one of the important things in any job is this idea of team building and being a good team worker. And the only way that you do that is if you're able to effectively share ideas with your colleagues in a way that's not offensive and so on and so forth. So anyway, so those are two questions just right off the bat. What's your process for giving them feedback? Not only how, but when, and or do students do their peers also give feedback?
Yeah, those are great questions. I give feedback at the end of the semester. So the way it functions for me in my course is more of a showcase. It is more of the best work, their chosen best work. I ask them, this semester I changed some things. I'm asking them to submit an artifact of a reading with the attached reflection, so their thinking and how it applies into their teaching philosophy. I'm asking them to submit one of the lesson planning projects that we did. Actually, I'm asking them to submit a couple projects. So at the end of the semester and during my finals time, instead of meeting as a class, they schedule individual meetings with me, 10, 15 minutes. They talk through their artifact with me, and then as a result, I can talk specifically to what needs to happen, what needs to be added. Now, I will say that the downside of that is I don't go back and check to see if they integrated it. So unless they open edit and start changing, they misspell that word and they start doing it, I'm not quite sure they're always fixing it. And that is a drawback. I would love to do it sooner, but I have a flexible submission schedule with work. So I have students who are waiting to the end of the semester to finish these projects, and then they're submitting it in. So this is something they're not able to do sooner just because of how I have things set up, and I'm not really interested in changing that format at the moment. In regards to peer evaluation and peer seeing this, that's actually a really great idea that I had not considered. I think some of our portfolios would improve immensely with their thinking as well as the presentation, the formatting, how the design, if they were sitting down with a partner and looking at them at various stages. I have a feeling that they are doing that in our earlier courses, but I doubt it's happening anything later than our intro thing. So I think that is something that next semester next week when we're starting to do some things, I think I'm going to have them open their portfolios And I think they're going to sit down with their classmates and start talking about design and what would be good artifacts for that. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, we're going to do that next week.
One of the other things that strikes me, and this is actually something that affects me specifically in the job that I do for the campus, is I provide support, and Marky provides support for Brightspace. I provide support mainly for the M365 tools. And we specifically have a policy that we do not provide support for Google Suite products. However, I know that in education, and not only in education at Crane, but education in SOPUS, a lot of students are being encouraged and taught to use Google Suite products. So I understand why that happens. I also know that technology is ever changing, and even though Google seems to be monolithic in the especially secondary, that I don't think that will always be true. That isn't necessarily always going to be true. But anyway, given that aside, we don't provide that support, and I'm thinking that maybe that is something that we should consider, because you were saying how one of the biggest challenges is that learning and teaching of the technology to the students, and faculty are then spending, well, like you, we're spending a lot of time getting the student prepared in order to use the tool, in order to create the portfolio. That's taking up your time instead of non subject area teaching in order just to teach the tool, right?
Yeah.
So that's something I think that the CCI should discuss and talk about as to whether or not we want to do that, even though we are not a Google campus. On the flip side, I also think that there are many tools that the campus does have access to that we could teach our students to use. All the M365 tools that would accomplish the exact same thing that's currently being done in Google. So there's discussion there to be had about the technology, and then how we teach that technology in such a way that it frees up an instructor from having to bear that burden. So I'll pause there. Yeah.
So I think Peter would be able to answer the institutional memory of why Google Sites might have been chosen. I personally do not enjoy using Google Sites for website work. So my reappointment portfolio is actually all in Weebly. But for me, I know Weebly, it changed ownership into Squarespace. So like there's always this unstable world when it is more of a capitalist project as opposed to maybe educational open source software. And not that Google's open source, but Google is a little bit more stable because it's so integrated into a lot of educational formats. So Peter, are you able to clarify some of those points?
Well, yeah, everything you said is valid. And, right now we're looking at a product called Anthology Portfolio, which is School of Education has, I think, mainly already selected as a place to house their TPA work. It has potential to go way down into the early parts of the students' work. So, for example, it can help us track observation hours. It's a product designed for schools of education, so it's not something that we have to hack together. And the pros and cons, I'm just thinking kind of the large category that we're talking about here is portability and ownership. So the students, as they want to generate something, and we want them to generate something that they can continue to use and access after they leave us. So that's an upside for using a product like Google to format it, or any of those other products that you mentioned, though you also correctly mentioned that sometimes they become, I had some stuff on websites that became inaccessible for about 6 months because I couldn't get into my old Weebly sites because they had become Squarespace sites, and then somehow magically it started working, but it took a long time. Anyway, so there's the issue of the student continuing to have access. Anthology Portfolio has a web portfolio tool built into it, and that was very interesting and exciting to me. But the downside is that although the website continues to exist after the students graduate, they can no longer edit it, so it becomes frozen in time. and maybe that's okay, but that's, that was an issue. And then the second part of it, though, of course, is that if we're using this as our kind of institutional TPA, we also need to be able, should the state ever come asking, be able to document the stuff that's there. And with all of these outside companies providing the back end web support, all that stuff could just go away very easily and quickly. Um, even because the student just didn't maintain the account or decided to take it down or whatever. So I am struggling with that question now, because I think that both of those are important needs, and it may be that we end up duplicating some things so that we can continue to have access to them even if the student's site goes down someday, because we're responsible for documenting to the state that the students have achieved those standards. We need to continue to be able to do that even if their personal site goes down. So I don't have a quick, easy answer to that yet, other than to say, well, maybe we have to duplicate some things, but some artifacts might have to be posted up to the anthology portfolio in addition to their personal website or something like that. That's a conversation for us to have, but the larger point is extremely valid, which is, how do you preserve, archive, and continue to maintain these artifacts as time passes?
And I will say, Google Sites has improved. All these web servers and places to house websites have improved over the last 10 years. I tried to use Google Sites 10 years ago. It was almost the options were too much for me. I wanted more drag and drop type of things. Google Sites has improved. Access to this type of thing is continually improving. I will say 20 years ago, when I was doing an undergraduate portfolio, we did it in Word. We were saving things as HTML with hyperlinks. So we had to sit through all of these things on just how to do hyperlinks and set up HTML friendly and learn how to upload to an FTP and all this type of thing and all of that. So at least while we still have to teach them these technical tools, I don't think it's as time consuming as it once was. So I think this is more realistic now more than ever.
Yeah, I used to have in the music technology course a substantial unit on website construction, and I do zero of that now. We still talk about websites, how they work, how links work, and recognizing domains and things like that, but we don't spend any time on the nuts and bolts of web editing, because the wizards are out there now to, just as you say, just drag and drop your content. The main reason, I guess, because I realized I didn't actually answer your question before, the main reason I think for our students using the Google products is simply that Google products are so embedded in the public school program that getting some facility with them is actually a skill that will serve them after they leave us as well. So.
As we talk, there's more and more things that pop up. I mean, like you said, the archive issue, the preservation and archive and access issue. That's huge. I'm always faculty are always very interested in that new cool tool that does the thing so easily and all that kind of stuff. And there's a reason for it, because learning a new product, the accessibility, the ease of use of a new tool, that's an investment in a faculty member's time, and you don't have it. And so you want to have something that does the thing that you want exactly the way that you want, as easily as possible, which makes total sense. But typically that costs something when we do that. And as we all know, the campus is not flush with money. So I'm always looking at, okay, what do we already have that we can use? And I also think that a lot of times people assume that you can't do the thing that you want to do with the tools that we have, instead of actually verifying that you can't do the thing that you want to do with the tools that we have. And I think often you can do it. It's just, you might have to tweak it a little bit. So but those are, again, other big issues. And I'll circle all that is to say, I can see this portfolio process being something that would be very important for many, if not most, degrees and departments to use as a key component of showing growth and learning throughout. It basically almost it's basically an assessment tool.
Yeah, one last thing with the art, we still don't have like a central database of these portfolios, so they get put out there. I actually had to go to last semester's Brightspace, and I, for a moment, froze when I was trying to find examples of portfolios. I'm like, oh, do I still have access to my Brightspace to go dig in to find a good example? So I think that's something as a department, I don't know if we want to start collecting these databases in some sort of a spreadsheet so that we can start looking at progress across or whatever, or they are submitting their portfolio links multiple times during our career, so that we as professors have access to see this type of learning, as opposed to when the students choose to do it or if we choose to do it. So I think that's something that we could probably improve on.
So one of the things, one of the features of this anthology portfolio product is that it can integrate with Brightspace, and you can create a portfolio template. Now, one of the things about our portfolio that I really like is that it's very open-ended in terms of the kinds of artifacts that students include, or the number of artifacts that they include. But we could, if we wanted to, actually create a template within that product that students would just drop assignments into, that would stay there and be accessible to anybody who, was kind of on a need to access basis. But um, that's a possible way to make them kind of consistent and make it easier for the students, more of a drag and drop experience for the students, because they would literally just be uploading something like an assignment like they already do in Brightspace. And then that continues to persist through the course of time, and they're all available or accessible, as I say, to anybody who needs to see them.